Okay, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Thurston Regional Housing Council meeting for May 26th. We have a quorum of the council, so let's go ahead and do some introductions for the record. Let's start. Just to say, Mayor Foster from Yelm is excused. He let us know that he couldn't make it today. So then let's go to Tumwater. Michael, can you walk us through who's here from Tumwater?
Yeah, thank you, Jim. Michael Althauser, Tumwater City Council. Our alternate, Joan Cathy, is here as well, also representing the council. John Doan, our city administrator, is here, and Brad Medjord from our planning department is also here.
Right. Thank you, Michael. Welcome, Tumwater. Let's go to Lacey next. Carolyn.
Hi, City Council member Carolyn Cox. And we have the all-star team here today. We've got Lenny Greenstein from council as our alternate to this group. We have city manager Scott Spence. We have Rick Walk, our community and economic development director, and we have the wonderful Kelly Adams.
Great. Welcome, Lacey. Thank you. And let's go to Thurston County next. Carolina. Oh, we don't hear you. It's the second time today for me on Zoom.
Hear me?
Yes, there you go.
Okay. Weird. Okay. Carolina Mejia, Thurston County Commission District 1. Today with us, we have Ramiro Chavez, our county manager. We have Tom Webster and Keely Marino, and as well as Jacinda Stelgis.
Okay. Welcome, Thurston County. And then from Olympia, we have Councilmember Danny Madrone, Assistant City Manager Keith Staley, and myself, City Council Member Jim Cooper. I think that's it. Do we miss anyone else for introductions?
I missed a couple people, Jim. I didn't notice, but in the participants, we have Lietta Dahlhoff as well as Eileen Swarthout. So 2 more City Council members from Tumwater listening in.
Okay, wonderful. Okay, so I think that concludes introductions. Is everyone okay with the agenda as we have it? Any changes?
I'll move to the agenda as submitted.
Second.
Okay, I have a motion and a second. Any amendments? All in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you. Okay, so that takes us to public comment. I don't have anyone signed up in advance, but I will see if anyone in the attendees would like to make a quick comment to the Regional Housing Council. You should be able to use the hand raising function on your Zoom. I'll just give that a second for folks to see if there is anyone. Okay, so I'm going to keep moving then and ask for a motion to approve the April minutes.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Any amendments? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries. Thank you. Okay, so that takes us to our big agenda item of the evening. We're going to talk about the RFP recommendations from the funding group. And I just want to start off with a huge thank you to the funding group because it was a significant investment in time to get us to this point. And we all know it and have heard about it. And thank you very much for that commitment to our region. So with that, I'm going to turn over to Tom Webster to walk us through what, oh, Michael, I see a hand. So just a quick sec.
That was accidental. I apologize.
Okay, cool, great. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and move to Tom Webster to walk us through what's in our packet.
All right, thank you. Good evening, everyone. So members of the elected members of the council did receive the information around the recommendations from the funding work group, and I'm going to share my screen if I'm allowed. So members of the public will also be able to see as we reveal the recommendations. So first want to provide a little bit of just a reminder of the process we've gone through. So back in January and February, the Regional Housing Council heard from the Housing Action Team from Thurston Thrives with their recommendations around funding priorities. And then in February, the Regional Housing Council, based on input from the funding work group, set the priorities for our RFP this year. And so those were enclosed within the RFP. We issued the RFP on February 26th. The RFP, then we had a bidders conference on March 3rd, where we had potential applicants come to hear and ask questions about the RFP. So there was an opportunity for applicants to ask questions. Applications were due in early April, and we received a total of 48 applications under the funds you're going to consider tonight, requesting about $11.6 million in funds. So I think a pretty robust response to the RFP process. Applications were reviewed by two sets of groups. Some of the applications were reviewed by a technical review team comprised of staff members from the jurisdictions, along with one representative from TRPC, kind of representing the South County. And then some of the applications were reviewed by the elected officials who sit on the RFP funding work group, and I'll kind of distinguish those as we go through those. On May 10th, that funding work group met, had a 4-hour meeting to go through all the applications and the recommendations, to do a lot of work to come up with the recommendations that they're presenting to you tonight. And so what we are presenting to you tonight is the results of what the RHC funding work group is passing on to you for your consideration. Next steps after tonight, once hopefully you approve or make any modifications to the final recommendations, then we will present these to the Board of County Commissioners for final approval. That will happen in mid-June. Some of the contracts will begin July 1st, and then other contracts will begin September 1st, depending on the funding source. As in the ILA, if the Board of County Commissioners wants to make any changes to these recommendations, they will send their kind of comments or back to this group for consideration to look at any of those projects or recommendations that they had questions about. So with that, what I'm going to do is walk through. We have about 5 buckets of money or funds where recommendations are made. So I'll walk through kind of the list of what the recommendations are, and then would ask for any questions around that specific group. And so we can do it kind of section by section, if that works for anyone. Before I go any further, any questions before I get into the actual recommendations? Or anyone from the RFP review working group that had anything they wanted to add that I missed? No? Okay. So the first group of applications we're presenting to you tonight are the basic needs funding awards. So these are the Human Services Fund. These are the 0.5% sales tax dollars that jurisdictions contribute into the pot. So these are local fund sources. And the priority was to fund basic needs, basic human need activities, kind of food assistance, hygiene activities, those types of things. So as you can see, we received, 7 applications. We had $272,621 to spend. So you can see the funding request from each of the agency and projects, and then what the recommendation is for a funding award. The funds, these were reviewed by the elected officials on the funding work group. Those that received an award were those that received a score of 80 or higher out of 100 points. So they set a cutoff at 80, funded everything that scored higher than 80, and then distributed the funds equally. So there was no distinction between the highest scoring application and the lowest scoring application that was recommended for funding in terms of the proportion. So I think it was around 90% of their ask in order to reach that threshold of what the funding was available. So everyone got the same proportion of their request that was funded. So it was around 92%, I believe, of the request that was funded. With the exception of Catholic Community Services Community Kitchen, because that was a larger request. These are, let's see if I have anything else to say about these. No, I think that's, so happy to answer any questions about these applications or any comments about the recommended funding levels.
Go ahead, Michael.
So did the Pacific Mountain Workforce Development Council just not meet that threshold of 80 points? Is that what happened on that one?
Yes, that is correct. That was the lowest scoring application. It was below 80. And for a distribution of funds, they decided not to fund that application because it was the lowest scoring project. It was below the 80 threshold, and they wanted to allocate the funds, sufficient funding to the other applicants.
Okay, thank you.
Tom, are you going to sew this back up into one action at the end, or should we take action on each bucket as we go?
I think it's probably, I defer to you and what you prefer, but I think it may be easiest to do kind of a separate action for each chunk, if that's okay with you.
Does that work for the committee members?
I think it makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So then questions, comments, or a motion?
Motion to approve the basic needs funding awards.
This is Carolyn. I'll second that.
Okay. Is there any discussion?
Well, speaking as a member of that committee, this money is for very, very basic needs, and it hurts your heart to trim even a penny off the request because what we're dealing with just is so dire. But I think thanks to J.W. Foster, we came up with this scoring system that set that 80% threshold. And 80 points. And if you didn't get there, then, it was a shame. But I think that allowed us to use the funds as equitably as we could.
Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
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 Aye. Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Okay, next, Tom.
Thank you. And I will just note that for these, we've listed them in alphabetical order. They are not listed in scoring from highest scoring to lowest. They're listed in alphabetical order for those that were funded and then kind of separately for those who were not. The next group is what we call housing basic needs. So out of our pot of 2163 funding, there was a set aside for $200,000 for housing basic needs. These are, I tend to think of these as homeless prevention activities. These are things that to help keep people in housing on an urgent or emergency basis. Received 8 applications. These applications were also reviewed by the elected officials on the funding work group. As you can see, we had $602,000 worth of requests and $200,000 of funding to award. Once again, these are listed in alphabetical order. A score of 80. So those applications that received a score of 80 or higher received funding. And again, they all received the same proportional share of funding of the funding award. So 2 agencies fell below that 80 point score threshold of the CYS and Pierce County AIDS Foundation. So it's a mix of, as you can see, kind of they're all housing programs. So happy to answer any questions, but about specific activities.
Questions for Tom?
Tom, can you talk a little bit about why CYS, maybe some of the areas where they didn't accrue the points that would have gotten them up to 80? I just know that they're an organization that has received this kind of funding in the past, I believe. So just kind of curious about what sort of happened with them falling below that threshold.
Yeah, and I look to members of the team that actually reviewed this application to weigh in.
Right.
I'd be happy to weigh in on that. This proposal, it wasn't entirely responsive to the questions. It looked like maybe it was a grant writer who was rushed. And also in terms of the budget, it was all for funding staff time and not for the actual needs that would be supplied. So that, and just, it wasn't entirely responsive, and it was kind of not entirely clear what the scope of work would be for that $30,000.
Romero?
Okay. Thank you.
And good afternoon. I just have a question related to the Rochester Organization for Families for the rental assistance. How that relate to the Community Action Council rental assistance, was had significant amount of money to all the citizens and who are in need in the county. Just curious the relationship with that.
Yeah, and so this is a program ROOF has operated for many years, where it's kind of short term. It tends to be one time or immediate rent assistance when someone, perhaps they had a car repair and they're having a difficult time paying their rent. So it's a relatively small amount of money that ROOF is able to use to support kind of their clients who run into some difficulty. So those clients will have access to the rent assistance funding under Community Action Council, which is a more robust program, requires a little more documentation for eligibility. So this is more kind of that one-time urgent need for rent assistance, as I believe the program is operated. So,
Tom, doesn't it have a ceiling on it too, like $400 or something like that? Or am I confusing it with another one?
yeah, I haven't read all the applications, so I couldn't speak to that specifically.
I believe the funding, the rental assistance through CAC is specifically people who have been impacted by COVID. And so this provides an opportunity for somebody who maybe their rent shortage doesn't have to do with the pandemic. It was going to happen anyway.
Yeah, that's a good point. Thank you.
Good question. Other questions? I'd be open to a motion.
All right. Well, this is Carolyn. I will move to approve the 2021 Housing Basic Needs Funding Awards as presented.
Is there a second?
Second. It's Michael.
I have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Tom?
All right, thank you. So we started off with the easier ones first. Now we're going to go into the housing service funding awards. And so have a couple different groups, going to break these up into a couple different sections, and then you can vote on them as a whole. So the first is under our Housing and Essential Needs program. We receive a grant from the State Department of Commerce. And we have one agency in our county that is authorized to operate this program, and that is Community Action Council. So we do request them to submit an application. They're the only application received as the only agency that can operate that program. We actually estimate, based on the state budget, that funding award will be closer to kind of probably $2.5 million. But we'll see. We have not received that allocation from the Department of Commerce yet, but that was the one application, and so recommending to fund that contract to CAC for the HEN. CE is coordinated entry, so there was also a set aside for $250,000 to operate our coordinated entry system. Family Support Center submitted the only application for coordinated entry. They did request $350,000 for coordinated entry to add some additional staff capacity. After reviewing the application. So let me stop and back up for just a minute. All these applications were reviewed by the technical review team, so the staff from the jurisdictions and TRPC. So these were not reviewed, applications were not reviewed by the elected officials, but our technical review team who read and scored these applications. Their recommendation to the funding work group was to fund family support at the $250,000 level, which is what they've been funded at for the last several years. That the funds, while Additional funding for coordinated entry would be beneficial. Those additional funds would be best used in other areas of the homeless crisis response system. So we're recommending $250,000, which was the set aside amount for coordinated entry. Then we had $250,000 set aside for cold and hazardous weather. We received, as whatever that is, 8 applications about for cold and hazardous weather. Those include for cold weather. Our cold weather season goes from November 1st through April 31st. And so this is to expand shelter capacity. These are the only applications that will be 1-year contracts. Everything else is intended to be a 2-year award with 1 year, with a 1-year contract with 1 year of funding with an intent to provide a second year at the same level of funding if funding is available. So if our revenue for the 2163 document recording fees and from the state continue on track. We did 1-year contracts for the cold and hazardous weather, partially because Interfaith Works, their 2828 Martin Way, they submitted a proposal to do cold weather for the second year. But they won't be able to have, so we don't have a single adult shelter for this coming winter. And so wanted to do a 1-year award so that next year we can recompete these awards and hopefully have a single adult shelter that we're able to fund for the cold weather season. So you can see the recommendations here. So there's 2 for our hazardous weather. The hazardous weather are year-round contracts. So this allows for an expansion of shelter capacity or an expansion of shelter-in-place activities during a hazardous weather event, which is declared by the Public Health and Social Services Director. So a snowstorm, but it could also happen in the summer, such as during smoke season, or another event. So an expanded shelter capacity during those events. And then for cold weather season, we have a youth shelter, Rosie's Place, family support, Pear Blossom, and then Partners in Prevention Education providing shelter-in-place activities since we don't have a single adult provider who will be able to provide services this coming winter. So let me stop there and see if there's any questions about the HEN, the coordinated entry, or the cold and hazardous weather set aside recommendations.
Questions?
Okay. If you do have questions, we can come back to those. I'm going to move down to the services portion of this. So with those set asides and the other set asides that have been allocated, there was $2.61 million available to spend kind of on a competitive process for the remaining service dollars. The shaded portions here indicate different types of projects. And so we broke the funding work group, kind of thought about these in these 4 different buckets. The blue there is for permanent supportive housing projects. And I have to say that the Safe Place, we've miscategorized, I apologize. The Safe Place supportive housing for seniors really is a rapid rehousing project. So that should have been shaded peach or whatever that color is there. So these first 2 are permanent supportive housing projects. The next 4 are rapid rehousing projects. The green shading are kind of more of a miscellaneous category of general services. And then the yellow are our shelter projects. So we thought about them in those 4 buckets of activities. And so these are the recommendations for funding for the permanent supportive housing. So we have the 2 permanent supportive housing of Catholic Community Services Drexel House and Ponza Quixote Village. Rapid rehousing. One of the things I'll say about the rapid rehousing recommendations is they're actually a little bit less than what a lot of these programs received in past years. And some of the thinking of the review team was that because we do have a substantial amount of rental assistance in the community, that this rapid rehousing dollars can be used to get people into housing. It's really to help people find housing and move people into housing and help them to sustain it for 6 to 9 months or whatever kind of initial period. but then they can be transitioned perhaps more quickly and access those rent assistance dollars that our community has from the Department of Treasury or Commerce. So there was a slight reduction in some of these awards with the hope and expectation that rapid rehousing will be able to also utilize those rent assistance funds. Our services.
Wait, Michael, do you want, sorry, Michael has his hand up. Do you need a question about that bucket?
Yeah, about that bucket, specifically for the Safe Place one. I was wondering if any of the members who sit on the RFP review committee could talk about why that one is so much lower than the other requests. If it was just that population might be more likely to be served by the Community Action Council rental assistance dollars, or if there was any other sort of discussion or reason why that one was so much disproportionately lower than the other buckets that are shaded peach.
Well, Keely was the chair of that review team, so I'll let Keely see if she can answer that question.
I'm also looking at Carrie. So I think also what is not accounted for in this, unless Tom, you've put it in any kind of order, is score. And so although like where the scores fell. So if my memory serves correctly, that in terms of overall scoring, that project scored lower than the other permanent supportive housing projects and was a newer project, I believe. And in respect of all of the funding that we had to allocate. So looking at the scores in terms of it being a competitive process, it being a newer project, and balancing it throughout the entire fund award distribution.
Yeah, so I'll say,
Okay.
Keely, just to jump in, these are not listed in score order. They're kind of more alphabetical.
Yeah.
My other recollection, and you may recall, was that the 60,000 is more in line to what Safe Place has received in past years, that the 342,000 request was a substantial increase over what they've received in the past. And so the other awards kind of line up a little bit more with kind of what those organizations have received in the past as well.
Got it. Thank you.
Romero?
Looking at the peach, including the Safe Place, and can you walk me through the decision-making process the team took in allocating the funding versus the actual request? I just did a quick math and seems the percentage is a little bit off, not consistent. How you ended up on let's say the request by 342,000, it was 60,000. The other one was 249,000, and the recommendations 200,000. Just curious.
Yeah, so we did not do a formula overall. We did look at it in buckets, and if I recall in our conversations, Tom, that it was actually put up there next to Ponza when we were making these determinations. We did start the conversation in shelter, seeing as that is one of the most, a very emergent need and a very big ask of the overall funds that were available. And so moving into the other buckets of projects that we were looking at the time, it was put, if I'm remembering correctly, in this bucket. And so it was a lot of, and I'm looking at if there's anyone else who can join me in this discussion about the ways in which we determined how we move through allocations, was determine on score, determine on the project, determined by where our priority set in terms of what was considered to be higher priority according to the RFP and the recommendations coming from the RHC funders work group.
Yeah, Keely's memory is correct on that. We started with a score based on reviewing all the applications together. For our purposes, we grouped them together in the categories you see here. We didn't reflect the scores in here, and perhaps we need to do that next time because I think that sort of indicates the direction we were going. At that same time, we also pulled back after our initial reviews as individuals, and part of a group discussion sort of combined our group knowledge of these particular projects and the individual things that were occurring in these applications and made adjustments from there. So we really didn't have a formula that would work across all of these because they were pretty big differences in these kinds of projects. And that's why it's a lot. The numbers are they're not as neat as the first couple categories, I think.
And Ramiro, this is Kerry with the City of Olympia. The other thing that I'll add is that, there's some context here, like Brad said, that you're missing this score, you're not seeing, but you're also not seeing some of the criteria that we had as far as priorities when we convened and started scoring, and prior to us even awarding funds, was also, the approach, the first do no harm approach. So what were the current levels of funding that some of these projects were getting from the county, and how do we make sure that we continue those services? Many of these providers asked for much more than their current funding levels, which is totally understandable, but that also, so that those two pieces, right, wanting to make sure that we tried to maintain funding where the county already had an existing funding commitment, and that other piece of taking into account what that prior funding commitment was, were also part of our, also had an influence on our scoring or on the final ranking and how we allocated funds.
Yeah, and the last thing I would add is there's some, in terms of balancing, especially between the youth, adults, and family populations, that we know families tend to be more expensive to house in. They need 2-3 bedroom apartments, which are more expensive. Single adults tend to be more in single 1 bedroom apartments were a little less, and then youth, just a smaller population. So some of it was also balancing out the needs between, especially the different populations, and then kind of with DV having a bit fewer, a smaller population as well. So some of it in terms of trying to balance out the needs between family, youth, and single adults as well.
Good question.
All right, so I'm going to move on to the green category of the services. And so services, to be honest, was probably the lowest priority of what to fund. That the funding the shelter, rapid rehousing, permanent supportive housing were activities that were seen as higher priority than kind of generally services. So services were generally, there was less money left over for services. The group tended to fund those other activities first and then see what was remaining for services. I will say that the technical team actually recommended only funding the Family Support Center Homeless Family Services project, and they did not recommend funding for Build-A-Bus or the Senior Services for South Sound Home Share Program. When we took this to the funding work group, the funding work group felt that those were important projects to fund, and so they did add money to those. So those were not a recommendation coming from the technical team, but were additions from the RFP, the work group kind of session. Everything else you see here is reflective of what the technical team recommended to the funding work group. So I know I'll let Keely talk a little bit about the senior services project. I know there's been some discussion around that, but I'll kind of let her talk about why that wasn't initially recommended from the technical team as for funding.
And Keely, because it'll be a question, can you address why both of them weren't in the original recommendation?
Yes. So first of all, as we all know, this is incredibly difficult. There were over $8 million in asks and only 27 or 2.7 million, actually, yeah, 2.7 million or so in what we could award. Every one of these projects is a crucial, essential project to our system, every single one. So there had to be really hard choices and really hard decisions made in the spirit of meeting the priorities that were set, as well as maintaining the system. As we know, our sheltering system took quite a hit with COVID in multiple ways. One, they had to, respond to the pandemic, as well as increase their staffing if they were relying on volunteers. So that increased their costs across the board. So just really tough year. So if you recall, when we brought the priorities before the Regional Housing Council and the Senior Housing Project there was a set aside that was requested, it was set aside, the $100,000. The language in the RFP that was approved by the Regional Housing Council to move forward in issuing the RFP stated that, and I'm going to read it now, that Thurston County intends to award funds for programs that specifically target senior citizens to assist participant to obtain or maintain affordable housing. Projects must support low-income seniors at or below 30% of area median income who are homeless or at risk of homelessness. And then it lists the types of services. So when we're looking at these decisions, and we're looking at definitely underfunding our shelter, our shelter service providers, and we know that the Interfaith Works shelter serves primarily seniors who are definitely 30% of area median income. And then the application that came in from although it very, very important program, very, very important. It came in requesting funds for up to 12 placements of up to 12 individuals at 60% AMI or below. We couldn't justify that it didn't meet the criteria that was stated in the RFP. So we went round and round and round on it, but when it came down to it, we fell back on the language that was released within the RFP. 30% below of area, 30% or below of area median income. And then for some of the other projects, oh, sorry, 1 second. So for some of the other projects, again, as Tom said, oftentimes with services, they end up being on the lowest priority after we get through shelter and rapid rehousing and permanent supportive housing. Although, again, super needed. Coordinated entry needs a data entry person and has needed it for a really long time. It is so important. And when it comes down to choosing between that and funding a shelter for that amount, it's really hard. It's really, it becomes difficult. So some of the scoring criteria are also about capacity, if they are a new program or if they've been funded before. So some of these were brand new programs that have not been funded before through this process. And so although like absolutely valuable and necessary, like and part of the essential services in a homeless crisis response system, scored low. So for instance, the Build-A-Bus, the shower power, crucial, excellent group of people with excellent service scored really low, as well as the Yelm, oh, that's down in the shelter level balance here. So, but so based on scoring, based on how we had to prioritize our funds, that was why initially level bound or the Build-A-Bus shower power wasn't recommended to be funded, although it pained us to say so. Does that make sense? Or do you have any questions?
Certainly highlight the complexity of and why it's important to look at the whole picture, right? Whether you like the outcome or not.
And I'll just add for the CYS, the Haven House application, why that was not scored. That turned out to be a duplicate application. So it was actually the same application as your young adult housing. And it looks like an error on their part. They submitted a duplicate application. So it wasn't actually an application for Haven House. It was titled Haven House, but it was a duplicate of their young adult housing application. And that's why it was not scored, because it's not in the end an application for Haven House.
I have a hand up from Scott.
So just a question related to the home share program. Could that be viewed as actually not a service, but actually affordable housing? Is that the right category? And I guess the follow-up question is, I know we have capital projects for housing. Isn't sometimes 80% AMI used for that specific purpose?
So what's important to remember is that when we're talking about homeless services, we're talking predominantly 2163. So if the RFP came in requesting $2163, those dollars are set aside specifically for homeless services. And so anytime a project comes in for homeless service dollars at 60% AMI or higher, it's going to be deprioritized. We'll get down to the RFI and the affordable housing projects. There are a number of projects that are coming in specifically serving the senior population, which is awesome. It's definitely needed. And in the services we already have that are underfunded. We do have the most vulnerable seniors being sheltered at Interfaith Works. So, and also it's a buy and for. So we have that set aside for buy and for agencies. So that's why.
Thanks.
Question.
Yeah, I'm not sure our fund sources, right, for the capital, whether the home share program would qualify as a capital project. It's more of a, I think of it more of as kind of a rent assistance or service. So we'd have to look at whether it would qualify for kind of the capital funds.
Well, isn't it largely staffing versus? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And then I'll just, so the bottom, the yellow portion here are our shelters. So these are kind of the core of our shelter system, those funds. Clearly a big topic of conversation was the Interfaith Works application for the $2.2 million of, would have taken pretty much our whole funding. And that was a consolidated application that included, and Keely, help me if I missed something there, their emergency shelter at First Christian Church. It included support for their, they're currently at First United Methodist, and then eventually at their Springbook structure, their daytime coordinated, the old community care center, navigation team, outreach efforts. So this Interfaith Works combined 3 or 4 different activities they're doing into one mass application. So the review team really struggled to how to think about that application and how to break it down. As Keely indicated, the level bounds here, the $430,000 ask was a big ask for a brand new project from a agency that's still developing capacity. So that one seemed tough. And then the others is just trying to maintain those shelters. So Keely, I guess I'd look to you to add anything, especially around that Interfaith Works application, because that was a big one.
Sure. And the way that I thought about it and framed it is, well, it's two separate shelters. If you think about a shelter, and it's primarily funded through county funds. So the shelters in and of themselves are a 600 to 800,000 operation. Many of the other shelters have other, funds coming in to help support them. And then when it comes to single adult population, which isn't by the largest population by family size. So like Family Support Center, I've heard so many times, like if you just talk about head of household, that could be, looks like 2 people or 1 person, but it could be 6 people attached to that. So, we recognize that families are huge population, single adults also huge population. And when it comes to anytime there's a request to respond to COVID, to what have you, that it often falls on Interfaith Works. So there are 2 separate shelters that are going to be coming online. There are 2 separate shelters now. So we're just trying to balance, like in terms of single adult shelters, I'm looking at the we have Drexel House and Interfaith Works, and that's upwards of 60 individuals at any given time. So just try to keep it really in perspective of like the population size and other funding sources that are available to each of the agencies, et cetera.
And so just to kind of wrap up, so what you'll see is the recommendations here are for fund awards for 2.7 million, just over 2.7 million. They had 2.61 million to allocate, so they are requesting kind of essentially an additional $100,000 to dip into the 2163 fund balance to fund these applications. So despite those hard decisions, the RFP funding work group is requesting kind of $100,000 of fund balance to fund these projects.
And just for totals, I'm tracking about 4.95 for this page. Does that sound right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Can I ask one more question?
Go ahead, Michael.
I should have asked this at the top. If the hen turns out to be 2.5 million instead of 1.7, do we have to revisit this and vote again to recommend the higher amount for hen?
No, so what will be, the HEN will be provided at the funding level that is contracted from the state. So
Okay. So whatever that is.
whatever that is will be contracted to CAC.
Okay, thank
It's
you.
an important distinction in our motion, though. So I'm wondering if we need to do any changes, should we do these by sub buckets, or where are folks at on this whole page? So we've gone $100,000 into the million we held aside, and it's complex, and we all have other priorities. So how do we want to handle this? Michael?
I'm fine with the going in for 100,000 from the bucket, and approving this as it's presented. I don't have concerns about the amounts that we came up with. So I would be okay with this page as it exists.
And I'll just say I generally agree with you, Michael. Particularly, I'd like to fund more in the senior services project, but I think for me, based on the AMI and the description Keely gave, it might make sense for some of the other cities to pitch in a little bit if they can. Like I'll go work on that for my city goal money from a different pot to help fill that gap. I can commit to that. But that's just two of us. So other thoughts.
Well, this is Carolyn, and I'm pretty comfortable with where we landed on this as a whole.
Yeah, I have to say I'm not comfortable with any of it to the point of how big the need is, right?
Comfortable is a relative word, but
yeah, you triggered me, Carolyn. So
sorry.
Carolina?
I mean, I was in the work group, and none of this was easy, and it was frustrating, and you just wish you had enough to fund all of these great things, but if everyone's ready to move on, I am too.
So we have in front of us $4.901 million with the flexibility around the Commerce Rental Assistance Fund to the CAC based on the actual amount. Is there a motion?
Motion to, so moved.
I'll second.
Not sure what it was called, a motion to fund the housing services. Is that it, Tom?
So moved works.
So moved. Okay, there we go. Keely, you have your hand up.
No, there's two hands up, one for Scott and one for Ramiro. So
I was going to do that before I take a vote since we started a motion. Thanks, Keely. Is there a second?
Yeah, this is Carolyn, second.
Okay, Ramiro?
Thank you. It was more of a comment and maybe some feedback. I know the scores include about 20%. They will be allocated for racial equity activities advancing. So it was pretty significant on the point allocation. I was just wondering from the scoring team if in fact that made a difference on the scoring. Because I'm just curious because I recall it was close to 20% of the overall score, and I believe the RHC set aside for advancing racial equity, if that really made a difference on the scoring.
Good
yeah,
question.
I would agree. I would say that with the 20%, with that being weighted so heavily, it did. And so some scores, I don't have them memorized on the ways in which we did score them, but I know that did impact overall scoring at such a high, it being 20 of 100 points or so, it did definitely impact it.
That might be something to highlight when the news release are sent out.
Yeah, in fact, not just highlight, in my opinion, lead with and put as the opening and talk about some of these specific projects and organizations. It's really cool. So.
Yeah,
Danny?
and I'll add, there was a question about the CYS grant that wasn't funded in one of the previous things that were already voted on. And that was one of the questions where they just kind of neglected to answer the question. And you know, there were words there, but it wasn't talking about racial equity. So that one was one of the things that brought them down.
Okay.
Well, I guess for Megan's benefit, in the conversation where we were working on the scoring criteria, we decided on that 20% for race because we really wanted to make a statement this year about equity. So it was very, very intentional.
Right. Well, and related to that, we have money set aside for a contractor to take that equity work to the next level, right?
That is correct, yes.
Okay, so let's make sure we include that as in any communications as well. Okay, any other discussion? Okay, as a reminder, the motion on the floor is to approve the presented funding around housing services for a total of $4.901,500,000. All in favor, say aye.
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 Aye. Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you. Next, Tom.
All right, thank you for that. Now we're on to our Housing Capital Fund Awards. So these are capital funds to develop housing, create more affordable housing units. This is a mix of federal and local dollars. So this year we actually had a substantial amount, probably more than in past years, to award of around $1.6 million. Typically, we've had projects that are in the housing pipeline that come in for these funds, and we're allocating to those projects that were identified in the pipeline. This year, the two projects that were identified in the pipeline were not ready to go this year, and so they dropped out. That was Foundation for the Challenged and Ponza Quixote Communities. So it was an open competition this year for the capital fund. So there was 6 applications received. You can see the requests here. The Family Support Center Family Housing Project was a project that was previously funded. They had a bit of a shortfall because of tax credits are not as, didn't quite get as much money out of the tax credit process from the creditors as expected. So they needed to come in for a little extra money. But that is the project that Family Support is moving forward with, and it's been funded in the past. And so there's an interest in making sure that project is successful. Habitat for Humanity Tumwater Townhomes is a new activity. The Homes First Affordable Home Solar Installation Match, that seemed, for $12,000, something that the group wanted to support. And then the Lehigh, this is Martin Way 2828 Phase 2. So this is the next phase of the Martin Way project. That was in the pipeline for next year, but because of the open kind of slot, Lehigh came in and wanted to go this year. That is also a sizable project. And I'll look to Carrie to talk about that in more detail. But again, a project that's trying to show a strong local commitment to, so that they will be competitive in receiving state trust fund and housing tax credit funding for that project to be fully funded. Carrie, I looked at Carrie to add anything on the capital projects.
Thanks, Tom. Yeah, I will add too that some of these award recommendations, the City of Olympia also made awards through Home Fund. Some of the projects also came into the county and others did not. So Family Support Center, City of Olympia made a big funding commitment to them. Again, as Tom said, the Family Support Center needs to get across the finish line. They had another funding partner back out, and many projects around the state and around the country have had changes in their tax credit value, which has meant basically that they've needed to find more money for construction of their projects. So Family Support Center is not alone, but they're very near, they have a very full funding stack nearly. So we needed to kind of help them get across the finish line, and this is what it took to do that. Habitat for Humanity is a really exciting project in Tumwater, really strong leverage again. And then the Lehigh Martin Way Phase 2 is going to add more supportive housing for single adults. So most of those housing placements for that project are going to come through the coordinated entry system. It's, like Tom said, new units in our community's portfolio. Part of the reason that they had to make such a big ask of the county is because City of Olympia put most of our home fund award this year towards Family Support Center to help them fill their funding gap. And then, and so we didn't have as much money to commit to new projects. So City of Olympia committed $150,000 to the Martin Way Phase 2 and $150,000 to the project that Housing Authority of Thurston County is working on in Tumwater. So I think this is also a really exciting list in the context of, like Tom said, a number of projects have fallen out of the process and construction costs are very high right now. The cost of lumber and plywood is extraordinary. And there are ongoing labor challenges for a lot of employers because of COVID, new regulations and safety concerns. Prevailing wage has had an impact on a lot of costs related to this work. So I feel really fortunate that we have as strong a list for you as we do right here.
Okay. Questions around the capital pot? Okay.
This is Carolyn. I'll move approval of the 2021 Housing Capital Funding Awards.
Second.
Okay, I got a motion and a double second. Any further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Okay, so $6,546 short of $7 million we just did.
All right, and the last one for your consideration tonight is for those pipeline projects. So we issued, outside of the RFP process, we issue an RFI, a request for information, to identify projects to place, capital projects that we want to fund in 2024. So these projects have time to kind of put together their funding stack. And so what we have for you is a recommendation to place one project on the pipeline. This is a Habitat for Humanity project on Home and Drive. It would be a 55 plus, so a senior housing project. And I'll look to Carrie here to fill in some details on these projects. You'll recall we discussed last time the Homes First application. It was an incomplete application, so that project was not reviewed or considered for placement on the pipeline. That was not a unanimous decision by the funding team, by the funding work group, or the technical review team, but that was the majority opinion because it was an incomplete application not to review it. And then the Housing Land Trust, there's a recommendation not to place that on the pipeline at this time, which would leave one open spot on the pipeline in the future for next year. A sense that the Housing Land Trust needs to do a little more capacity building and come in with a little bit more of a robust kind of project. And I'll let Carrie speak to that as well. So recommending one project for placement on the pipeline, which leaves an open spot so that these organizations or other organizations could come in, next year or in a future time to fill that 2024 spot. So it's not being filled. So there's an opportunity for these agencies to continue to kind of pursue funding in 2024. So I look to Carrie to kind of add some color to those projects or that discussion.
Thanks, Tom. So one note that I would add is that it seems, you can still come in for capital funding in the future without being in the pipeline. As Tom mentioned, we saw that in the list that you all just approved. Two, the Habitat for Humanity project is very strong. It's very competitive, and it's on track to immediately compete for state funds and funds through the Housing Finance Commission. So we also wanted to make sure that that they stay on track to do that. The Homes First and Land Trust projects don't have as much leverage outside of the county at this time, and they don't have funding lined up from other sources. So it didn't seem as high a priority to pipeline them at this time. The other thing in our mind that we talked a lot about is the lack of multifamily project in here. So we don't have right now a project that is serving, that's constructing multifamily units where generally we get the most bang for our buck as far as, dollar for dollar investment. We're also not seeing projects on this list right now that are serving folks with disabilities through a supportive housing project, something like the Family Support Center that you all funded last year, or the Martin Way Phase 2 project this year. So we're hoping to see something like that in the future in the pipeline as well. And of course, at the staff level, we're working on trying to identify what that project is and what the location of that might be in the county.
Okay. So I guess my question is, it's okay though, because this is in the 2 years out that we don't have enough applications right now to fill the pipeline. Okay.
Right.
But also
And
makes me think that we need to think about whether we need to do some capacity building for our nonprofit housing developers, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. There is the Land Trust is a good example of an organization that has, that they are still developing. They have a strong concept and they're filling a need in our community. They don't have staff yet. They don't have a lot of the things that we want to help them support and develop in order for us to feel ready and confident to fund them.
Okay. Other questions on the pipeline? Okay. Do we need a motion on the pipeline, Tom? Does that go to the county commissioners too?
This does not go to the county commissioners, but it was some sort of approval, just because we will let folks know kind of the results of what you're recommending. So you're not recommending, you are kind of, this is, kind of
establishing the pipeline. Right?
Establishing the pipeline.
Okay. So I guess, is there a motion to add the Habitat for Humanity Home and Drive project to the Thurston County Housing Pipeline?
So moved. This is Carolyn.
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. So Tom, I guess one question I have is whether we should think about like the next year version of this and maybe try to have that open longer. I don't know if that would matter, but I almost wonder if that should be like a rolling application that we look at once a year so people can think longer term about their applications. I don't know if that helps or not, but.
Yeah, I think there is probably some discussion for the Housing Action Team, Affordable Housing Team is looking at the pipeline along with a funding group to take a look at the pipeline moving forward. I think there's some discussions there to be had to make sure that process, because we've had people drop out and it gets a little confusing and complicated to move projects around. So I think there's an opportunity for continued discussion between the Affordable Housing Team under the hat and the funding work group to think through how to move forward with the pipeline in a more efficient and effective manner.
Okay. Romero, does that give you everything you need to go to the commission? Okay. Okay, I'm going to keep us moving. Tom, nice job within 5 minutes on the timing of the agenda. So, so we'll go now to the funding a major regional housing project conversation, and I'm going to have Tom recap where we're at.
All right. So based on last month's RHC and the discussion, there was a work group, a group of folks got together to kind of try to continue that discussion of how to move forward, of utilizing the money coming into the county, whether that's American Rescue Plan Act or other kind of perhaps money from the states, to make a substantial impact in our affordable housing sector. So we had a good meeting, tossed around ideas, and then it went to the technical team to flesh out. And so what the technical team, I will share my screen again, came up with, was part of your packet, was a one-page framework to really try to focus the work of this group moving forward. And there was a lot of talk and discussion around making sure that this was not duplicative of the work that the affordable housing team is doing, that the pipeline that we just talked about, the work that is doing, the work that the jurisdictions are doing through their housing action plans that is moving forward, trying to carve out a very specific and narrow focus for this group so that we weren't kind of stepping on toes or creating confusion for those who are working on those other efforts out there. So the technical team really came up with the narrow focus of planning, coming up with a plan to develop 150 to 200 units of permanent supportive housing by 2024, and how to move forward with that. With creating a group primarily of the RHC technical team, plus inviting 1 to 2 members of the affordable housing team to participate on this work group to develop that plan and process. With also asking the affordable housing team to serve in an advisory capacity to this group so that they have input into that process. Kind of talk a little bit about the relationship just to make sure it's clear what this group is not doing and trying to avoid kind of that duplication of effort with other outstanding efforts that are going on, and really trying to tie this to the 5-year plan goal of creating 300 units of permanent supportive housing and exceeding that goal. Through the work through the pipeline and the Olympia Home Fund, we're on track to meet that goal of 300 units, but really want to exceed creating those 300 units by 2024. And so one of the things for this group to do is to look at those potential resources, the ARPA funds, the 1406 funds, and then other potential sources of funding. With the goal of coming back to the RHC at your September meeting with a plan, and we outlined some of those key elements of the plan in this document of identifying, options for use of available resources to maximize leverage and efficiency, perhaps identifying potential property, process for selecting a developer. And I'm sorry, I'm hearing a little feedback. I don't know if that's me.
It's fixed now.
Okay. And then identifying kind of next steps and how to move forward. So that is what based on the discussion that was had with some members of the RHC that the technical team has come up with as a path forward. So happy to kind of be interested in feedback, questions, understand that there's a lot of detail within here that would need to be fleshed out, but as trying to identify a path forward of where we're going.
Is that what you thought you were asking Lenny and I to do?
And is this what you thought you were telling us to do?
Right. Thoughts or comments, responses to that? So just as a reminder, it makes our current 5-year plan and turns it from 300 to 500 as a stretch goal, right?
Yeah, I think this is Michael. I think for our piece, I was also on the group that met to sort of chat about this document as well. I think one of the big takeaways that we have to, kind of be cognizant of is just scale of 150 to 200 units and how big of a project that is. in terms of Tumwater's, obviously our resources are smaller under ARPA than those that have been granted to the other jurisdictions on the line. And we're still waiting to hear back as to how much our grant has shrunk, for lack of a better word. Like, we were thinking we were going to get $5.2 million. Now it sort of seems like that might be 2.6. It all sort of seems to be turning on the definition, what definition of a city we fall under. So our share of dollars is really up in the air. So we haven't had a chance to sort of even know or figure out what we're actually going to be getting in terms of resources. So I think that's sort of a complicating factor to kind of look at this, is we don't really know how big our bucket is. I think we're still, very excited and willing to be at the table and say, yeah, we want to work on a big regional project. That's why we're here as a part of this group, is to work on these issues regionally. We just don't really know how much money we're getting, and we're not really sure when we'll actually figure that out. So,
Scott, you have your hand up?
I do. I just want to make sure we capture, because again, this, as I read it, it sounds like we would go into, I'll call it a mega project. I think we're still want to explore the option of what is the best way to get to the 150 or 300 units. So it could be a combination of acquisition, it could be a combination of building, it could be just maybe getting property so we have something in the future that we could build on, or maybe there's just other smaller projects that finally gets that number, right? And also just the leveraging of other resources at the federal and state level. I want to make sure that we try to somehow capture that too.
Well, the leveraging we talked about, I've talked with several different versions of that with people on this call. And trying to really, I think we're able to operate somewhere between $8 and $10 of leveraging for every dollar we spend, and that starts getting it to go further. So Lenny?
Yeah, the only thing I would add is, like Michael was just saying, our allotment from the federal dollars was substantially reduced as well by about 45%. So we went from, 11 plus to about 6. So again, that's going to have an impact. And the only other thing I would add is that, when we're talking 150 to 200 units, which I think is a great goal for this, it doesn't have to be one project. It could be multiple smaller projects, which may actually be a better option. And to just reiterate what Scott said, we definitely need to be looking at purchase rather than necessarily build, because we can stretch the dollars quite a bit further if we can find property to buy.
Yeah, or if we have land, some of those kinds of things, and then too, Lenny, if somebody had a 100-unit hotel for sale in their community, that would get us a long way, and we have 4 other small projects, right?
That's the kind of thing I was thinking. Exactly.
Good. Okay, cool.
Yeah, there certainly was no intent to kind of identify, say this was one project, or, right, that would be the work of this group and probably would not be one project of how to get there. Yeah.
And I saw Keith leaning in, and I want to just check, I think if I remember right, the city of Olympia has set aside $2 million for a regional project, $1 million from this year's payment and $1 million from next year's. Is that right, Keith?
Yes, sir. And that hasn't changed at this point.
Okay. Any other comments or questions for right now, or should we keep doing this work and working towards a product?
I think this is a good start.
Thank you, Tom, for taking a really tough conversation and fitting it on one page.
Yeah, that was pretty remarkable, I have to say.
Yeah, because I was like, how is he going to do this? And then when I read it, I was like, yeah, it sounds good.
Good, because we weren't sure either.
Tom's the guy.
Okay, great. Thank you all for that. So we'll now go to the scattered site RFP. Tom.
So just a relatively short update. So the county did issue an RFP to seek proposals for kind of the case management and site governance component of the scattered site proposal. So you'll remember there was kind of 2 core elements. That one was the site management, which the city of Olympia will be taking the lead on to provide the garbage services, the hygiene services, storage, those types of activities. The county is working on crafting an interlocal agreement and a contract to provide funding to the city of Olympia to provide for those services. But then we issued an RFP to find a contractor to provide the case management, the site governance support to that. We received one proposal. It was a strong proposal, and we will be looking to bring that before the Board of County Commissioners here on June 8th, I believe is the Tuesday, for their approval. So we are looking to move forward with getting board approval for that contract and then issuing a contract to that provider to issue those services. So that's where we are in the process. So hopefully by early June, we will have approval to go ahead and execute that contract, and hope that things will be started here very soon.
Okay. Good work. Questions on that? Okay. Thank you, Tom. So that takes us to good of the order. So I'll just open it up. I have one thing I want to throw on the table, and we don't have to dispense with it today, but I think I'm experiencing a conundrum in our work with the cities working on the housing action plan right now, and a lot of conversation in the community about, at least in Olympia, about, when are we going to get upstream and work on the prevention side of this conversation? And the dichotomy or the conflict, if you will, between the 5-year plan around homelessness and the housing action plan, which looks at housing strata across the community, and where our work lies in that. And to me, that's a question that we need to do a better job answering to the community as in what our role is. And even if we're too caught up in the interventions that have to happen today, at some point, can we get to a bigger planning process that's looking at both the prevention and the intervention side of this conversation? And for me, that to Lenny's point before the meeting, we got to get in the same room and roll up our sleeves and have that conversation, I think. And I think it would be really helpful if we talked about trying to have a retreat or some sort of longer meeting in the fall, because I'm sure there's other things we need to talk about as well that are more sort of the vision and the direction as we move into year 2 of the Regional Housing Council. So I just want to, I know that's a lot to throw out at you, but to me, it feels like that's a conversation that our communities are going to demand that we have, and we need to be ready to answer it a little bit better than we are now. Danny?
Yeah, I appreciate that, Jim. I've been reviewing our draft regional housing plan for the land use committee tomorrow evening, and a lot of the actions in there are stated as like this is best done as a regional effort at the Regional Housing Council. So I think having some kind of retreat to start hashing through some of that would be a really good move.
Anything else for good of the order? Shelley, do you have any updates for us?
Well, I do want to just say thank you so much to Tom and Keely and our entire Office of Housing and Homeless Prevention team that works really hard to do all of this. Super proud, really great job. And thank you for everyone for your help in this process. In terms of COVID updates, we're approaching 10,000 confirmed cases of COVID-19 in Thurston County, 63 new cases today. So COVID continues to be a concern for us. We've been following the changes in all of the guidance regarding masking and continuing to promote vaccinations. Masking is still required in our shelters and schools and many other congregate and healthcare settings. And we're seeing a overall kind of slowing of people seeking vaccination. So appreciate everyone's help and your leadership in helping us continue to get our community vaccinated. We are at about 56% of 16 and older in our population that has had at least one dose of COVID-19 vaccine, and we need to get that to 70% in the next 4 weeks. So we have lots of vaccines available, so please help us encourage that. And we're continuing to support our community in vaccinating those experiencing homelessness and those with access issues. The Olympia Free Clinic and many other providers in our community have been doing a great job in vaccinating our encampments. We've at Thurston County Public Health been working on offering mobile clinics to our shelters and affordable housing areas. Today we were at Union Gospel Mission. And so we're going to continue to be working on that really hard.
Question for you, Shelley. Do you have any kind of a schedule of, places and times available for people to walk in for vaccine? Because I know we gotten a couple of those a few weeks ago, and I know I shared that as widely as I could. And anything, I think if you've had that kind of a list that you can share with us, a lot of us have big networks that we can share it with. I'd love to put it out there on social media and that kind of stuff anywhere I could to help. So.
Thank you so much. Yes, we would love and appreciate that help in getting the word out. We do have it available on our Thurston County Public Health and Social Services website and on our social media, but we can share that out to you. All of our vaccine sites can accommodate people walking up without an appointment. And we're happy to partner with organizations and people in our community to offer mobile and pop-ups as well. So yes, and we're continuing to operate our SPSCC drive-through site and have lots of appointments and walk-up services available there in addition to all of our mobile services. And we're starting a mall pop-up clinic. So we will be at the Capitol Mall for the next 3 days as well.
Carolyn?
Shelley, this is Carolyn. I don't want to put you entirely on the spot, maybe a little bit on the spot, but once the June 30th date, we cross that, and assuming the governor sticks with the plan to open up, I know our city council has been talking a little bit about, what council meetings might look like, whether we go to a hybrid or just what. And I'm sure the other jurisdictions here are grappling with the same issue. So do you have any just general guidance about that? I mean, I think you have a fair sense of the configuration of the council chambers, and you certainly, have kind of a small area to work with at the county commissioner's boardroom as well. So any just general advice that you feel comfortable giving?
It's hard to predict what things are going to be like after June 30th and what kind of changes might happen, but I would be happy to consult with any of you on that. We also have a business team that helps advise people on kind of those types of plans and interprets the guidance. Our county met today actually to talk about upcoming masking guidance and reviewed the miscellaneous venues guidance by LNI and also updates to the OPMA that gives some guidance around public meetings. So I would encourage any jurisdiction to take a look at that. And then let me know if you have questions or you need some technical assistance. And we're continuing to monitor the changes, but happy to help.
Good question.
Well, I really appreciate that. I think I'm probably not the only person who's still suffering a little from whiplash on Thurston County was right on the edge of having to drop back to level 2 to suddenly we're going to open up the end of June and CDC no longer requires masks, and like, whoa, what happened? And, I think we all need to get on the same page and comfortable going forward so that we don't end up causing more exposures or illnesses with this.
Agreed. Thank you, Caroline. You're not alone in feeling that way.
Carolina, I see your hand up.
Yeah, I have a different question, but it's not for Shelley.
Okay. Anything else for Shelley? Thank you, Shelley. And I'll just lift up the thanks to your housing team. It's pretty significant that we just got through our first major recommendation to the county commissioners as a new entity. So, and that's all because of your staff team. So thank you again to that team.
Thank you.
Okay, Carolina.
Yeah, I was wondering maybe from Tom or Carrie if there are any updates on the hotels.
I don't have any updates that I feel comfortable providing. I don't know, I like the City of Olympia or others, but I don't have anything that I'm able to share.
Stay tuned. Come tune in again next month.
If you see one for sale, put it in offer.
Yeah. Drive in.
Anything else for the good of the order? Okay, everyone, we're adjourned. I'll see you on June 23rd. Have a good weekend.
Thanks.
Safe.
Great to see everybody.